Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Sunday. Thank you for being here with me. Um, I put these live streams together based on things that come across my news feeds usually. I collect them. um, any kind of new, amazing kind of story about the nature of reality that strikes my fancy. I go to the website, I copy the URL, and I send it to myself as an email in a special folder called Jeff Stuff. Sometimes the discoveries that come through are so amazing that I just write it on a notepad, and I know that that's what this live stream is going to be about. Other times, I'm not quite sure. I'll go back through my Jeff Stuff folder and start looking through the cool stuff that's there, and something will jump. There's so much there that it's really not much of a problem to come up with some topic, because the world is an absolutely mind-boggling place. I mean, ordinary reality is stranger than fiction. And this broadcast sort of is no exception. I've got my rain hat on. And of course, since we're talking about water, one of the things that we don't like about water is when it rains on us. But here in California, it's always dry. So we enjoy the water. Whenever the water shows up, we jump up and down and rejoice, and everything turns green. Other than that, it's usually sort of brown around here. And you sort of get a little parched after a while. So when the rain actually happens, it becomes a very enjoyable thing. And then there's that smell. There's that smell of release of actually bacteria in the soil that, and there's a certain name for that, and I can't remember the name, but there's a name for the smell of rain on the ground. Then, of course, there is the whole thing that happens because water droplets magnify and split the prism of full light from the sun and make everything more intense and beautiful and colorful when it rains. I've discussed this many times in the past. Various aspects that include water, where we're essentially water beings. We were born underwater. We were living underwater until we were born, floating in amniotic fluid. Our ancient ancestors. I'm not talking about Astragalus or Homo erectus or Neanderthal or Denisovian or any of those other ancestors that were humanoid. I'm talking about our great to the power of a million ancestors in the primordial ooze. Those ancestors grew up in water. So water is a good subject. What brought me here today with water is one of the latest news feeds came through and talking about new discoveries about the amazing qualities of the most amazing molecule in the whole universe, and that's water. Water does things as a molecule that no other molecule does. It's multifaceted, and it continues to fascinate, and new discoveries are made all the time. So we are talking about quantum aspects of water and everything in between. So that's pretty much what today's No Small Talk Sunday is going to be about. Now, so water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. That's definitely the thing here in California, where California gets its water from the Colorado River and through a series of big aqueducts, goes across a couple of state lines in order to water the farming fields in California, and so I can turn my tap on and water comes out. There was talk in San Diego of building a desalination plant, which would take seawater. 2/3 of the whole Earth's surface is water, but it's briny water with salt in it and a bunch of other stuff in it. It has to be removed, which is an expensive and difficult process. But a desalination plant would solve California's problems, and 5 or 6 of them up the coast would solve all the problems for California. And what's really weird is that California used to have, San Diego used to have a desalination plant here. But back in those days, it was cheaper and easier to bring it with, $100 million aqueduct system from the Colorado, River. But now there's so many states using the Colorado River water that all these states are hurting. Not enough water to go around for everybody. So now they're thinking about rebuilding this desalination plant that they scrapped, 40, 50 years ago. Humans aren't, humans might be the smartest dumb race or a species in the world. Where does water come from? Now, I have discussed this way in the past when I talked about Pangea. So if you go back to the previous broadcast, back from 2020 and 2021, and scroll down and look for the broadcast on Pangea, I discussed this little thing then. Matt Bradford, a scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, spoke of the discovery and said it showed that water can be found throughout the universe. The environment around this quasar is unique in that it's producing this huge amount of water. It's another demonstration that water is pervasive throughout the universe, even at the very earliest times, all the way back to the beginning of the formation of our universe. There are a number of these massive, gigantic, unimaginably huge stands of water floating in space. Most of the ideas of where water came from of the Earth, and this is again a 12 billion year old body of water discovered floating in space. Scientists have confirmed that the largest body of water in the known universe is shockingly 12 billion years old. Largest and farthest reservoir of water ever detected in the universe. 12 billion year old cosmic water reservoir uncovered in space. Scientists from the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, have discovered the largest reservoir of water in the universe. This water body is located at a distance of 30 billion trillion miles from Earth, according to the British website Unilad. Well, we're probably not going to be getting that water to Earth anytime soon to solve our water problems, but just the fact that water molecules are floating free in space is sort of a mind blower. Just free in space. Oceans and oceans and mega oceans in space floating around. Just water floating in space. Now, most of the conjecture, which I outlined before in a previous broadcast, is that icy comets and asteroids full of water ice, frozen in deep space, bombarded the Earth in the early years of Earth's formation, and that's what filled up all the oceans and played a part in cooling the molten planet with frozen ice from space and continual bombardments that happened in its early formation. We actually know that to be true. Asteroids may have delivered water to the early Earth. The space rocks impacts wouldn't have boiled all of their water away. Some of it would have been deposited. Water vapor can be trapped in glass and melted rocks that are created by an asteroid impact. The finding boosts the idea that asteroids brought water to the early Earth. Water from space. So in the beginning, as the Earth began to cool and these asteroids continued to bombard the Earth and deposit water there, we began to have the earliest pools of water, which eventually formed the first mineral deposits from space and these asteroids and from the Earth's mantle. Each impact is pulling stuff from the deep parts of the mantle and beneath the mantle up onto the surface. When I did the broadcast on gold, that is where the heavy metals like gold and nickel and copper and tungsten and all of the rest of the heavy metals that normally, because they're heavy, sink into the Earth's surface when it's still in its molten phase. Most planets have their heavy metals sunk deep into the Earth's surface, not on the outside of the planet where the crust is. So it's a double interesting thing that Earth has, first of all, fostered life, that all of the ingredients serendipitously all arrived in this magic little wonderland Goldilocks zone of our planet, third from the sun, where all the conditions were exactly perfect for water actually to exist in all three states at the same time. Ice and water and gas, all at the same time. The perfect little zone of temperature that would make that happen, and lend itself to the major big impacts, like in particular the impact which I covered before, where Earth was struck by a planetoid in the early solar system. Once the planets had formed and they were still molten and being bombarded, a rogue planetoid entered into our solar system from deep space and crashed into Jupiter. That's now the turbulent nature of what's going on Jupiter, like things like the red spot. Even though the red spot is only, I think, 600, 700 years old, the whole idea that Jupiter is a giant gas planet and could absorb that kind of contact because it's so massive and so huge, that kind of collision would tear whatever it is to pieces. Because remember, Jupiter, as you go deeper and deeper into the gas clouds, it's all a big gas thing. But it's so massive that the gas has weight and it compresses more and more until finally you end up in a compressed fog that has tremendous amount of pressure until it becomes a quasi-solid that has no real solid boundary. So an impact would tear something to pieces and spin it out from Jupiter into all kinds of chunks and planetoid and asteroid-sized chunks that eventually one of the biggest ones crashed into the Earth in a massive, unimaginably gigantic impact that pulled ejectile stuff right out of almost to the core of the planet, out past the atmosphere, and orbited around the Earth as a series of rings that bombarded and crashed together and formed eventually the moon. And as the moon orbits around, it impacts all of those particles. So now the moon is being bombarded by all of these chunks that are orbiting around the Earth. As the moon travels around the Earth, it sort of cleans it up like a vacuum cleaner. Um, that's where we got the earth, and that's how come we have the heavy metals that we depend on the surface of the earth and not buried deep, because the ejecta that came up out of that impact took all the heavy metals and deposited it on the surface for us to use. Another serendipitous, mind-blowing, amazing thing, just so we could be alive, right? At some point, the organic chemicals that started to sediment out into these hot, steaming pools of water that started showing up in the primordial oceans eventually became the primordial ooze and the primordial soup that formed life itself as single-cell organisms. And the steam that came up from this boiling water formed the primitive atmosphere. But that atmosphere was not a very good atmosphere for any kind of life on the surface because the chemicals were all wrong. But with the development of single-cell organisms that began to form in the primordial ooze of the original water on Earth, their byproduct of their metabolism formed the chemical atmosphere that we see now. Approximately 70% nitrogen and 28% oxygen, and the rest exotic sort of chemicals. These little guys populated the Earth with the atmosphere that we now use in order to be alive. And sort of in the beginning, these organisms, I've talked about this before too, in the beginning, we've got these little organisms, these little single-cell organisms that are duking it out for the food in this massive competition thing for the food. And at some point, something important happened in the history of our most ancient ancestors, these guys, our most ancient ancestors. Something happened. Nobody knows what, but something shifted, and the organisms began to realize that it was a better survival advantage to cooperate instead of compete. So the concept of competition is the old reptile brain in humans, the unevolved part of us. And the evolved part of us is cooperation and symbiosis and joining together. Essentially, love one another. And so that became the cooperation between different organisms to band together to make it easier to find food as a multicellular organism than to compete with each other wholesale. And once you have the combining together and the symbiotic relationship of organisms forming multicellular organisms, you begin to create new forms of life that have a survival advantage. And as time went on, the construction of ever grander scale multicellular organisms began to take place. And that became the basic foundation of DNA for constructing the blueprints for these new types of organisms, and eventually became, through a series of stages, you and me. But, in one sense, it's the reason why we are not at all what we think we are. That there are a dozen species of microscopic mites who live out their entire existence in your eyelashes. You would never know that's there, but they're on your skin, they're in your hair, they're in your gut. 25,000 different varieties of bacterial life. And each one of those 25,000 divisions have highly specific and different duties to do in your gut to help digest your food for you and them. And they, all of them, all 25,000 varieties, have different DNA than you. They're other creatures in a symbiotic relationship where you are the host world and the chemical environment that they require to be alive. And they help break down the food so that you can maintain that chemical environment for them. My first foray into this, when I was going to school and taking cellular biology, and for the first time in my life realizing that there were other creatures living in our body that had different DNA, that was a real shock to me. I had no idea. I mean, of course, this was 50 years ago. And that moment had to do with mitochondria, you know, so we're studying cellular biology. And here's the cell with all these little, it has a nucleus and it's got all these little organelles inside, and they've all got fancy names: endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, the powerhouse of the cell that gives it ATP energy, the final stage of all the chemical processes of digesting your food down to its final stage where you extract energy out of it. The energy that gets extracted is ATP, adenine triphosphate. That's the basic energy coin of the realm of your body that your body uses for cellular energy to be alive with. And your body can't produce it at all. It's produced by mitochondria. Mitochondria is a capsule-shaped little organism, and when you cut it open and look inside, it's got these folds inside for more surface area to accomplish the step-down transforming of a chemical cascade of chemical processes that finally end themselves as ATP. So mitochondria produce the basic energy unit that all your cells require to be alive. And those various cells create the chemical environment that the mitochondria requires to be alive. Mitochondria requires a very specific type of environment to be able to be alive, and your cell provides that in the intracellular fluid. Now, it's floating around in extracellular fluid because your body is 70% water, since we're talking about water. But when you analyze the mitochondria, you realize that its DNA is completely different than us. So it's a symbiotic relationship at the absolute core level of your body. Every cell in your body. How many cells are there? I can't remember. It's trillions of cells in your body. Every single one of them's got mitochondria. And depending on what kind of cell it is, it will have more than one mitochondria per cell. For instance, the heart. The heart beats approximately 60 times per minute, and that's a lot of heartbeats in an hour, and a lot of heartbeats in a lifetime. And every time that heart contracts and squeezes, the muscles need energy to make that happen, and the energy is coming from mitochondria. So a heart cell has got thousands and thousands and thousands of mitochondria per cell to supply all that energy that's needed for continual squeezing and relaxing of the heart muscle. The heart muscle by far has more mitochondria than any other cell in the body. The interesting thing there is, that if you count up all of the cells in your body, and then you take into account that each cell has a number of mitochondria per cell. There's no just, one mitochondria for one cell. Every cell has more than one mitochondria in it. So do the math. There are more mitochondria with foreign DNA than there is you. They outnumber your cells that make you what you think you are. That's not even taking into account the 25,000 different varieties of bacteria with different DNA living in your gut. We're just talking about all the cells in your body, right? So when you count everything up, who you think you are with your cellular makeup is the minority. And foreign creatures of different DNA that are all different from each other in their DNA is who makes you up. Like, it's a true, massive, multicellular organism of different DNAs, all bound together in a miracle of symbiosis, a miracle of cooperation. Trillions of cells of different creatures and different DNA, all living harmoniously together so I can be me. All because back at some certain point in the primordial ooze, these little single-cell organisms somehow, for some reason, decided that cooperation was a superior way of surviving than competition, right? And all of the rest of it spun from that. And now here I am, and here all you are, in this amazing kind of scenario that we're in the world. And so now, you know, here's all of us as multicellular organisms, people on Earth, duking it out, right? Fighting each other, warfare, strife, enemies, competition. Our whole world is filled with competition, and the competition is not for duking it out for the food. It's the higher order conditioning that only human beings do, which is, well, not only human beings, but human beings do in this finest possible form. Higher order conditioning, food becomes money. Money stands for anything and everything that you need to be alive. And then on top of that is all the stuff you need to buy, luxury stuff that you don't need to be alive. It's just to make you happy. But at its basis, where the majority of people on planet Earth live, they're trying to make enough money just to survive and have a roof over your head and have some food on the table for you and your children, and to somehow have some semblance of being safe from the elements of the earth. Most people on the planet don't have running water and don't have a toilet and don't have a real house. They've got a shanty that's put together with corrugated tin and cardboard. So most of how money is looked upon on the world are poor people hoping for enough money just to be able to survive. And it's my belief that what we need now is a second arrival of that magical thing that happened, you know, way back to our ancient ancestors, where it somehow from somewhere dawns on all of us that cooperation is better than competition. When is that going to happen? When is humanity going to realize that if we all bound ourselves together in a massive planet-wide symbiosis, then so much good could be done, and so much waste of lives and money to support the war machine could be used to build a civilization where we could all have heaven on earth, right? Now, from the esoteric secrets from the Far East and from the Middle East, the kind of stuff that I talked about in the past that Gurdjieff had brought over from these secret societies that had kept these secrets passed down and passed down for thousands of years, and nobody had ever heard of it because they did a good job of keeping it secret. It's not for the masses. It's for, it's for the priesthood. It's for the enlightened ones. This concept that working together is the highest form of evolution, where binding together and putting our talents together is where it's truly at. So out of the primordial soup we arise, and the key to it is cooperation and symbiosis. And as we wait around for the magical thing to happen that's going to, waken everybody up at once, and then we realize that competition is not the evolved form that we're trying to move towards, it's cooperation and symbiosis. The Secrets from the East has given us a clue. Nature supplies it once, and then when you need it again, it's an intentional effort. It doesn't get supplied to you twice. It gives supplied to you once. That's the rules of nature. Nature will supply it once in the beginning, and then when you evolve to a certain critical point, now it's conscious labor and intentional effort that we now have to do it. We have to make that decision. And that essentially is what these live streams are all about. In order to create a symbiotic cascade of consciousness at a subquantum level by using brainwave entrainment, where everybody around the world that's listening to this broadcast right now, I think there's 30,000 people following at this point, listen with headphones, and everybody's brainwaves get exactly linked to exactly the same place of consciousness. And now we have the high-tech ability to focus consciousness to a critical place that is the requirement to open the door to higher dimensions of information and influence of the quantum field to decide collectively what is the next moment of reality going to look like. What kind of world do we want? So as the esoteric texts have said, God says you can have anything you want. All you got to do is ask for it without words, before a thought. That means it's a visualization process. It's a restructuring, a reframing of my idea of what the world looks like, what the world feels like, what the world could be, or that we would all agree what we would want from a perfect world. There's certain basic tenets that most of the people on Earth would put on their list of what they would like a world to look like if it could snap from what it is. The clown bus and crazy show that we've got going right now could magically transform, and we could be the midwives together for the birth of a spontaneous remission of humanity as a whole, where symbiosis was the norm. Competition was a thing in a history book. Cooperation was the order of the day. Symbiosis with one another, symbiosis with all life forms on the planet, who would now be recognized as having equal rights as sovereign living beings in the universe, where we form deep symbiotic relationships with other life forms, other plant forms, tree forms. The ancients are, we are indigenous ancestors who we have lost. We have lost our indigenous selves. We've lost our indigenous relationship to the universe. We're cast into darkness. We're lost. We've lost our way. We're a babe in the woods, lost and sick. So it may be, that this grand scientific experiment that we're attempting to do here with these mind links, at least there's no downside to it. It's either the ravings of an addled mind, or it aligns with the ancient texts and modern quantum physicists who are saying that reality is a product of consciousness and an expectation of consciousness. Manage the expectation, and the universe changes and conforms to that expectation, if that expectation comes from the right place. Doesn't come from here, comes from deep in here, and it doesn't come from just me. It comes from all of us connected together at a collective unconscious subquantum realm, which is before a thought. That is the deep, ancient part of me, which is what, meditation has traditionally always been trying to do. And now in the 21st century is so unimaginably, abnormally, weirdly stressful here that it's almost impossible to use the old techniques of meditation to hold a candle to the hurricane forces of the stresses of the 21st century. We need new forms, high-tech forms of meditation to penetrate into the deep places of ourselves. Brain entrainment, certain types of soundtracks, 3D processing can cut through the noise and help us to find our place of silence and exercise that place of silence up and develop, see that muscle right there, and develop the muscle of spirit so that you can weather the storms of the 21st century because you've muscled yourself up to handle it. You're Schwarzeneggered yourself up to be abnormally powerful in your spirit, in your inner balance, and your ability to align with other people at a subconscious level to make great change in the world itself. That's here. That's what we're up to here. But say hello to your great grandparents here. I remember that Earth is a water world. 2/3 of the whole planet is water. And at one point, the whole planet was water. As more strikes took place from asteroids, and water evaporated, and water evaporates naturally, earth changes took place and rose mountain ranges up out of the ocean. We now have 2/3 ocean and 1/3 landmass. It's a water world. We are water beings. We're water beings coming from a water world, right? Because, we were born in water. We were underwater for 9 months. You had an umbilical cord going to your belly button area. Nutrients and blood and oxygen were coming directly into your body from the placenta, which was grown by your mother's body and nurtured by your mother's body. So you didn't have to breathe. You were getting the oxygen directly into the bloodstream. 9 months of no breathing. You were a water being. And then your term of being a water being began to end. And then you sort of had a mini evolution thing where all of us came out of the primordial sea of the womb and walked on land and took our first breath. So from one standpoint, We are water beings who emerge from the primordial sea of our own experience, from the womb. And in order to walk on land, we carried the ocean within us. So we crafted an amazing looking spacesuit that looks like you and me. But inside that spacesuit is 70% ocean water. It's salty water. It's intracellular, extracellular fluid. It's blood. It's lymph. It's cerebral spinal fluid. All of these water forms in the body are similar to the ocean. They're briny and salty. They're weird, biological water. But we're essentially water beings in a dry spacesuit, so we can walk around on land and carry the ocean within us. All of us. And the water world that we're part of, and the water world that we've come from, places water as being one of the most significant things on the planet that we all have to have and need to be alive. Right? You can go up to 40 days without eating food swallowed down into your gut. You can go for about 3 days with no water before you die. You can go for about 3 minutes before you suffocate and drown in water. And you can only last for a second or two with no brain. Brain dead. That's what that means. There's a good order of importance of how the body looks at things, right? The brain is the most protected, and a bony skull to protect it. So that body looks at that as being the most important. Right. Number 2 would be the brainstem, extends down to C2, and the spinal cord that comes all the way down, protected by spinal vertebrae with discs in between them. Not quite the same as, full bone, but it's bone with super tough cartilaginous tissue in between. So brainstem and spinal cord would be number 2 of most protected, what the body considers to be of most importance. Number 3 would be the heart. Here's the heart. It's got the sternum, right? It's got a shield of bone right in front of it. Then it's got the ribs coming off. And the ribs have got tough muscle tissue in between each rib, the intercostals, with layers of muscles on top. So it could deflect a bite or an injury, and protect the lungs and protect the heart, and it protects the liver and the kidneys and the pancreas and the spleen. I mean, all of those vital type of organs, those are protected by the rib cage. So that's the next order of looked upon by the body as important for my survival. And then there's the gut, which has no bones around it. That's more open. So you can last for many hours with a gut injury before you die. So, however, you can cover the gut with the bones of your arms and protect it. And the arms and legs are expendable. You can cut them off, and if you stop the bleeding, you can survive. So there's sort of an order of how the body is protecting things that when you study anatomy and physiology, you can pretty much, logically figure out how the body is ordered its protection of the most vital parts of who I am. Consciousness is completely protected. It's put in a special place where nobody can even find it to attack it, except with words and ideas. So be careful there. Water. The molecule of water is an unimaginably precious, mind-blowing, special molecule. in the whole universe, it's the most amazing molecule of all. Its properties are continually mind-blowing, and new discoveries are made about the properties of water all the time. The basic idea of H2O, right? So you've got two H's and one O, two hydrogens and one oxygen. And remember, hydrogen is the original atom of all atoms in the very beginning of the formation of our universe. Hydrogen was the first. Helium came next. Lithium came next. And then everything started to spin from there. When things began to cool out from the, quote, Big Bang, if you believe that, cool out and form more and more and more atoms and compress themselves into stars. And out of the nuclear furnaces of the stars, when they exploded, the pressures formed all the other heavy elements that spewed out into the universe and bombarded different planets as asteroids and chunks from blown up pieces of suns to form the heavy elements that we required to build bodies out of. Carbon, and all the heavy elements like gold and silver and copper and nickel and all the rest of those. We have minute traces of certain of those heavy elements to make this body with. And they came from exploding internal dimensions of stars. Now we know that water has forms itself all on its own, just floating around in space. The propensity of hydrogen to bind itself to the oxygen molecule seems to be of supreme importance in the universe, or it wouldn't be forming this molecule just floating around in space. There are funny properties about how it works, where the binding of the electrons of the hydrogen molecule, the one that the hydrogen molecule has with one in the outer shell of oxygen, forms what's called a dipole, where you have more negative charges in the shells of oxygen. So oxygen becomes negatively charged at this end of the molecule, and this end of the molecule becomes positively charged by default. And that forces a repulsion of these two negatives, which forms an exact 104.45 degree angle. Now, this angle, for whatever reason, is of supreme importance in the universe. Because this forms a tetrahedron in three-dimensional space, one of the primal shapes in nature, the five platonic solids that were discovered by Plato, that forms the basis for all the structures of the atoms in the periodic table. All of the atoms in the periodic table have three-dimensional shape, and those shapes all form from one of those five platonic solids. This concept of the 104.45 degree angle that spontaneously arises from the repulsive forces of these two negative poles here, where all of this is negative, all of this is positive, but these two are repelling each other at this angle. That triangular shape, a tetrahedron in a three-dimensional shape of the water atom, or the water molecule, is the reason why water stacks in unique ways that no other molecule does. It's the reason why when water crystallizes, when it freezes up, when water freezes, this angle dictates the lattice that all of the water molecules are going to form as they freeze. And that lattice has a whole bunch of different crazy spaces because of the repulsive force here. So they don't, water molecules don't stack together nice and tightly. They stack together with a whole bunch of spaces in between them because they can't fit together any other way because they got this funny kind of an angle of 104.45 degrees. So that means that there's a lot of sort of spaces between the solid form of water, and that's why water is the only molecule that its frozen form floats. No other molecule in the universe, when it freezes, floats. It sinks, because no other molecule stacks together with big spaces in it, because no other molecule has this funny angle. So that's one property of ice floating to the surface, because if it didn't happen, you couldn't have a lake with anything alive in it in the wintertime, right? All of the ice floats to the surface and insulates the water underneath from getting too cold so the life can continue down there. If it was the other way around, if water ice sunk to the bottom, then the whole lake would get too cold and nothing could survive, right? Because life forms on Earth have a very specific narrow temperature range they can survive in, right? Properties of water are amazing, and it just gets more amazing as time goes on. Two hydrogen atoms bond to oxygen atom results in a bent shape of that angle. And you've got all three forms of water, gas, liquid, and solid, all within a certain temperature range that we can survive in on planet Earth. All three forms exist at the same time. There are certain questions of the density of water that is unique as a gas and a liquid and a solid form. Water is a universal solvent. It will dissolve anything. Something about the primordial nature of hydrogen with oxygen, which is a very energetic atom, can dissolve any substance, the universal solvent of all solvents. Because of the odd electromagnetic properties of water, because of it's a dipole, basically it becomes a big magnet. It's got a positive pole and a negative pole because of that triangle thing with the angle. And that means it sticks together in all kinds of ways when it's water. So the water molecule, when it's in its liquid form, forms a lattice work of these connections that are all magnets. And it's got what's called surface tension. So the surface tension is all this magnetic stack, linking together of the hydrogen oxygen poles of the positive and negative fields, which can support quite a bit of weight. So little creatures, little bugs can walk across the surface of the water because of the surface tension there. And as many of us know, if you jump off some like 30-foot cliff down into the water of a reservoir or something, if you don't land right, it's like landing on cement. The surface tension binds together and solidifies up. If you do a belly flop, that hurts. A plane crashing into the ocean, it's like crashing into the ground. It's like crashing into cement. The surface tension of the water strengthens up with a sharp blow. There's something called capillary action. You put a straw in the water, and it will creep up this straw, defying gravity. All of these things have to do with the angle and the fact that it's a dipole. Polar molecule due to the asymmetric shape because of this angle, 104.5. Vapor. So when we have the grand cycle on Earth, now I described this in a previous broadcast, a concept called the Hab theory, HAB. You might look that up if you didn't see that broadcast, the Hab theory. So we all know that the normal order of things on Earth is, as the Earth is spinning, it's not a perfect sphere. It's bulging out at the outsides near the equator because of spin. And the equators on Earth, all along that equator line, is the hottest place on Earth, where the most heat resides. And since 2/3 of the Earth is water and ocean, the ocean is absorbing the heat, and the water is vaporizing. Vapor is rising as the water heats; it turns into its vapor form, and the vapor rises because heat rises up into the atmosphere and forms clouds that float around. And as far as meteorology and weather is concerned, we have high pressure zones and low pressure zones. The high pressure zones have a lot of heat and water. Low pressure zones are cool and don't have any water. So the high pressure is forming from all of this water coming up off the oceans, the hot oceans at the equator, going up and forming clouds. The Earth's spin is making it not just come straight up, but it's coming up at an angle because it's spinning, Coriolis force, and is making its way towards the cold north and south pole from the equators. So it's trying to rise up and go towards the pole. And it can't quite do that because when it rises up, the spin of the Earth twists it so it has to go in a spiral to get there. And that spiral is called the trade winds. They've got speed because the Earth is traveling at its equator at almost 1,000 miles an hour, right? So that's that's a lot of movement. And on the way there, it spirals across the land masses. And as it cools from the equator, the water coalesces into raindrops and drops as rain on selected areas of the planet as it makes its way to the poles. But the poles get the lion's share of the precipitation. So there's something like 168,000 tons of ice that are forming on the two poles per day. And this has been going on for millennia. And that creates an ice pack on the South Pole, which is a landmass, and the North Pole, which is an ocean. So the North Pole ice mass is getting bigger and bigger and bigger from the snow dropping on it, but it's just sort of sinking down into the ocean and then raising the global ocean levels by some minute amount. South Pole is a landmass, and so it's getting an ice pack that's squishing the ground down into a huge crater because ice has weight, and that much weight on a daily basis is compacting onto the landmass. And since the landmass, if you look at a globe from the southern hemisphere, the Antarctica is not symmetrical right on the spin point. It's off center. So we get wobble. The Earth is, tilted, spinning on its axis, but it's also wobbling because of the asymmetrical ice pack. This is all still, now we're getting into the Hab theory, where eventually more and more ice pack on the South Pole makes the wobble get larger and larger and larger. When they measured in 1860 or something, when Scott went to the South Pole for the first time to make one of the measurements he was going to make was, how much is the wobble, right? And then it was 5 yards, and 10, 15 years later was, 5 miles. So it's getting bigger and bigger, and at some point the Earth will wobble so much it flips, and it will flip on its axis and wobble back and forth until it stabilizes, and then start spinning where the previous poles are now on the equator, and all that ice pack melts in a massive flood with a characteristic crater depression where the ice pack has squished the ground down. And if you start looking around, like the Hab theory did, you should be able to see characteristic depressions of where the previous poles used to be on the present equator line. And as it goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, one flip after another back through millennia, one of those that he outlined was Death Valley here in California, which is the lowest elevation point on this half of Earth, 290 feet below sea level, huge depression where a previous inland sea used to be, which, according to Hab, was formed by the melting of the ice pack that formed a sea and formed all these water-cut canyons in one of the driest places on Earth, Death Valley, one of the hottest places on Earth. Now, we have this thing of piezoelectricity and the piezoelectric effect. There is a weird property of water that, as I had discussed before, water in the body is not just water. It's biological water. It's sort of a colloidal. It's a funny substance that exists on the razor's edge of colloidal biological water on the one hand and liquid crystal on the other hand. Now, we all know that crystals like this have something called a piezoelectric effect. A crystal lattice structure is unique in the universe. The atomic lattice structure inside a crystal can be influenced by external electromagnetic fields, photon bombardment, and direct pressure. If I put pressure on this crystal, it would bend the shape of the lattice. And that's how come these can collect memory. They can hold information and disseminate that information through sympathetic resonance. The property of putting pressure on a crystal and generating an electrical pulse where there's no battery and it's not plugged in is a property of the physical lattice work of a crystal that's very crazy and mysterious, but it's a well-known thing. It's called the piezoelectric effect. And so in liquid crystal is the same properties of this, except it's liquid. And so if we put the biological water, where it's colloidal fluid on one hand and a liquid crystal on the other hand, if we put pressure in this liquid state, and we put pressure on that, then everything lines up and forms an electrical impulse that shoots out. This is how bone is formed and how bones heal. Because the osteoblast cells that form the bone cells, if you torque the bone cell, the membrane will torque and flip to the opposite polarity because of the piezoelectric effect and attract positive calcium ions to the break, and that's how the bone heals. That's how bone forms in the first place, because a fetus born in the first place has no bone. It's all tough fibroelastic tissue, cartilage, even all the skull bones. Everything is cartilage, not bone yet. Bone doesn't happen until gravity is added to the mix. And when we are floating in amniotic fluid for 9 months, we're weightless. And therefore, all of the cells that make up our body are having no torque. once you get into a gravity situation and you've got weight and torque on the bones, and the bones are subtly bending at a microscopic level because of gravity, then that causes a piezoelectric effect in the bone cells, attracts positive calcium ions, and that's how bone forms in the first place. Then we have this concept of microtubules in the body. The microtubules in the body are also formed from a crystalline structure that also has piezoelectric properties. So, when I went to school in the ancient past, we were taught that the cell is a little bag of water floating in water, right? So the bag of water is a thin little membrane, and inside are all these little organelles floating around. And that cell itself is floating around in extracellular fluid water with other cells. And now we know that that's not the case at all, that there's a cellular skeletal system made of microtubules, where the microtubules attach to all the little organelles inside the cell and attach to the inside of the cell wall and attach to each other in this very complex matrix of microtubular scaffolding, or a miniature skeletal system. And then on the outside of the cell, the cells are all attached to other cells with a microtubular scaffolding skeletal system as well. So the whole thing is not just floating around in intracellular, extracellular fluid. It's all bound up in a skeletal system made of microtubules that all have liquid crystal or crystalline structures that lend themselves to piezoelectrical effects. So because of that, as I've said once before, the science of vibration, where when I am talking to you, essentially taking a breath and blowing breath across vocal cords that vibrate, and I'm shaping that vibration with the shape of my mouth as I speak words, and I'm shooting that shaped wave packet of sound waves at you as I speak. And only the tiniest little percentage of that is channeling down your ear and being interpreted as language. The rest of it is a sound wave front of pressure hitting my body and microscopically putting pressure and torque on my cells. Which does what? And the cells all have have these crystalline structure skeletal system, right? And the water of the intracellular and extracellular fluid is razor edge colloidal fluid versus liquid crystal. Which one is it going to be? And what decides? Pressure and torque. So I just shooting pressure and torque at you. And when it hits, it causes pressure and torque to the cells and the intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid and the microtubules, and all of them generate an electrical charge from the piezoelectric effect, which is in the shape of the sound wave carried into your body as an electromagnetic wave of piezoelectric discharges that cause the next ones to discharge and the next ones to discharge. We have a pressure front that's causing my word shapes to carry through your whole body as electromagnetic shapes of the same words. And something about that is communicating directly to your unconscious mind without language. This is the science of vibration from the ancient texts from India and Sanskrit, where that is an explanation of the science of vibration from the standpoint of Sanskrit, that you chant these Sanskrit verses from, let's get something here, from the ancient texts of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, these 4,000-year-old texts in Sanskrit. You chant these at each other And the shapes of those Sanskrit syllables are impacting your deep unconscious mind with direct information. No translation necessary into little translating centers in the parietal and temporal parietal lobes of your brain that is either English or Japanese or Chinese or French or whatever. This is direct vibrational communication into the deepest part of your unconscious mind, which has a language of its own based on resonance, vibration, shape, and torque. And that brings us to other happy little places in the brain. Here's the pituitary gland. Right here is the hypothalamus, where the autonomic nervous system resides, the master center that tells all systems in your body what to do. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Here's the pineal gland. And in, esoteric science, this is the brow chakra. And this is the crown chakra. Inside the pineal gland are crystals with a lattice structure, with piezoelectric properties. Now, the pineal gland is small, about the size of my little fingernail. And so if you were to zoom inside with the microscope and take a look around, inside the pineal gland is something called brain sand. They call it brain sand because it looks like sand. But if you zoom in with the microscope to sand, you'll see that all the little sand is made of silica particles and stuff like that. This is made of calcite crystal. And because it has piezoelectric effects, it can generate electrical pulses. When I was a kid, one of the things that you could buy, one of the things that I had was a crystal radio set. So now we've got this radio set with some, coiled wires and this and that, but it doesn't plug in and it doesn't take a battery. It has a crystal sitting there inside. It's called a crystal radio set. And the radio set is all based on torquing this crystal for energy. And now the crystal becomes a radio antenna for picking up radio stations through a crystal set from piezoelectric activity in a crystal lattice. That's what this is. It's a crystal antenna, but there's tens of thousands of them, microscopic ones inside the pineal gland. Which brings up the question, what channel are you tuning into? Your consciousness can choose what channel you come under the influence of in the universe itself as information. What's activating it? Pranayama, breathing, associated with each different chakra, and activation of the entire nervous system and the pineal gland in particular by the cerebral spinal fluid, which is an electrolyte. So this information that came back from the secret societies from the Far East, from Gurdjieff, specifically talked about this organ, which was not named. It was the gland in your brain as part of a second circulatory system of blood, the sacred blood, which is cerebral spinal fluid, indistinguishable from blood plasma. Blood plasma and CSF look exactly the same unless you measure them, and then you find out both are electrolytes, and the electrolytic properties of sodium and potassium in each one is exactly reversed from one to the other. So one is inside-out blood, as it was described in the ancient texts. A secondary circulatory system of sacred blood that was opposite and distinct from regular blood, which had a single organ inside that blood, which could be activated at moments of perceptions of myself existing. perceptions of myself existing activates the cerebral spinal fluid as an electrolyte, which charges up all of the neurons of my whole brain and spinal cord, because CSF is a cranial sacral pump too, up and down the spinal cord, and activates the piezoelectric properties of the pineal gland and turns it into a radio receiver. And I believe it's also a radio broadcasting unit. I can do more than just receive from the universe. I can influence the universe by aligning myself with a goal and a purpose that is aligned with my spirit and the reason why I'm here on earth. So if I align with my purpose on earth, for which I am born and why I am here, I align with that, some new big thing takes place. I charge up my nervous system and my whole system in a way that doesn't happen in any other way. Yes, it's all very fascinating stuff. The resonant properties of these crystals in the pineal gland have been studied. Piezoelectricity in the human pineal gland. These are peer-reviewed journals. This is not just pie in the sky, new age palaver. Not that I ever believed that was the case anyhow from the ancient texts. I really trust those texts for opening up the inner dimensions of my consciousness, where I can freely communicate and receive information from the universe itself by channel number 13 or something. And I can flip it around and broadcast to the universe my vision of what I want the next moment to be. And it's essentially that part that's happening when we entrain our brains together. And we align all of our pineal glands together. And we broadcast something together that is not thinking, that is not of this part, but is of a heart desire, spiritual desire, for what kind of a world we want to create together, based on the highest principles that we can muster of what reality could be in its perfect sense. New Scientist, Water's quantum weirdness makes life possible. And here we go down the rabbit hole. All of everything up to this point is prep for what's about to come. And I'd better get my rain hat on because things are about to get really wet around here at a quantum level. So that and my trusty umbrella, which is a little bit difficult to open, so I'll just like depend on my hat, keep my pineal dry. But liquid flow is influenced by a quantum effect in water. Here's that sort of magic angle we're talking about. Oxygen and two hydrogens, positive and negative pole. Water squeezed in a new state, not liquid, nor solid, or gas, just pure quantum weirdness. Water in certain conditions of micro-scale conditions becomes a new thing completely, a new state of water that nobody's ever seen before. Physicists have crammed water inside extremely small cracks, about 10 billionth of a meter, and found the molecules entered a never-before-seen state. This is why I devoted this one to water. In this brand new state, the water molecules don't adhere to strict laws of classical physics anymore. nor do they behave like a liquid, gas, or solid. You know, it's like this weird quantum state has no parallel in our everyday life, but nevertheless seems to be a fundamental behavior of water, under the hood in the quantum realm. Water is also the only molecule that can reach a critical point where the pressure and the temperature are just right, where it reaches the superstate of its water and ice and gas all at the same time. It exists in all three states simultaneously with the right pressure and the right temperature. And now we see in the very center of this bullseye is a quantum state of water that nobody has ever seen before, that has special properties that sort of blow your brain away. At low temperatures, this tunneling water exhibits quantum motion through the separating potential walls, which is forbidden in the classical world. This means that the oxygen and hydrogen atoms of the water molecule are delocalized and therefore simultaneously present in all 6 symmetrical equivalent positions in the channel at the same time. It's one of those phenomena that only occur in quantum mechanics and has no parallel in our everyday experience. A single water molecule is made up of an oxygen atom and 2 hydrogens. The minerals channel, which are small enough to allow only one water molecule to sit inside, have a hexagonal shape due to the crystal structure of beryl. Strikingly, the hydrogen atoms occupied each of the 6 sides of the channel, with the oxygen atom at the center. Though there were only 2 hydrogen atoms, these occupied all 6 different symmetric orientations simultaneously. This is mind-blowing stuff. It's a hexagonal space occupied by only 2 hydrogen atoms that fill all 6 spaces at the same time, only in a quantum level, when water is squeezed into an extremely small tube that's super duper duper small. Passes through solid walls. During chemistry experiments carried out on the beryl crystalline structure, it was discovered that water molecules under extreme physical or special geological conditions arrange themselves into ultra-small hexagonal shape around a ring and enter a quantum tunneling state. This phenomenon goes beyond the known liquid, solid, or gaseous states, and, in this case, water behaves quite differently than what we are accustomed to, since it is capable of quantum motion. In this state, for example, water particles pass through solid walls, which according to the rules of classical physics is absolutely impossible. Quantum tunneling of water molecules through solid structures like a wall. Because at a quantum state, something happens to water. 2 hydrogens become 6 all of a sudden. It all kind of, and then it can elongate in that tunnel, and it creates new electromagnetic properties that no one's ever seen before. And the only other physical thing in the universe that can do quantum tunneling is sound waves. And I did a whole live stream on this. Look for the one called the phonon universe. Smallest quantum particle of sound is a phonon, and the smallest quantum particle of light is a photon. And up to this point with water, sound waves at a quantum level are the only ones who can tunnel through things and like tunneling through a wormhole. It's tunneling through solid matter with sound waves. Sound waves can pass through a vacuum by tunneling through the vacuum in a quantum state. So now we know that a sound can travel through a vacuum. And remember, a vacuum isn't a vacuum anyway. It's filled with energy. Quantum mechanics, the building blocks of nature's most intimate secrets. Quantum friction explains water's freaky flow. Physicists have finally solved the long-standing mystery of why water moves faster through narrow nanotubes. Now we're back to, the piezoelectric properties of nanotubes, the skeletal structure of our cells in our body, liquid crystal properties. Whenever you get around to doing dishes, how easily water slides down a dirty plate depends on how uneven and crusty the plate surface is. At the nanoscale, however, where surface features can be hundreds of thousands of times smaller than the average width of a human hair, water can experience friction even on surfaces that seem perfectly smooth. Consider, for instance, the puzzling case of carbon nanotubes. Experiments have shown that against common sense, the narrower these minuscule pipes are, the less friction water feels within them, and the faster the resulting flow. This is the exact opposite of how plumbing works in our familiar macro-scale world. These nanotubes, which form the microcellular skeleton throughout all the cells of your body and populate the neurons in your brain cells that are calculating what I'm saying right now and figuring out what this image means in your brain. The process in your brain going on right now is depending on water squeezing into these nanotubules and increasing its electromagnetic properties and shifting that biological water into a liquid crystal that generates piezoelectric impulses in the neurons in your brain. Right now, this very second, as you watch this broadcast. Nanotubules, microtubules in the axons of your brain cells, carrying electromagnetic impulses which are formed from torque of the nanotubules and the properties of water in those, flipping it into a liquid crystal with electromagnetic properties, electromagnetic sparks. And therefore, as I've said in a previous broadcast, the electricity running down the axons and the electricity spark that comes from the neurons in your brain that forms brain waves, the electricity is formed from pressure on nanotubules and the water forming a liquid crystal, flipping it into the liquid crystal state, and sound waves is what's moving down these axons. Sound waves is what's causing the piezoelectric discharge from the neurons in your brain right now. The brain is run on sound pressure waves that cause torque in the liquid crystalline structure of water and microtubules in your brain cells and in the axons. And the EEG measurement on the scalp is picking up the piezoelectric discharges from the pressure wave of sound waves moving in your neurons and axons. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Where's my hat? It's raining insane stuff out here, so get ready with your, things are getting real weird here. It's raining weirdness, and you got to be careful. Penrose and Hameroff's view, orchestrated objective reduction, ORC-R. I've talked about this in a previous live stream. Microtubules and neurons could have quantum effects on neuronal behavior, thus allowing the brain to behave as a quantum computer. What these guys are really saying, what Penrose was really saying, is that consciousness arises within this process at a quantum level. It's where consciousness interfaces from the quantum field into the macro field through quantum tubules in the neurons in your brain. Pretty crazy stuff, all of it driven by pressure waves from sound pulses. Now, when we look at the piezoelectric effect, the direct effect is the mechanical strain produces a voltage. In other words, sound vibrations create pressure. Pressure causes the piezoelectric discharge of an electrical signal out the other end. This is how the neurons work. Sound waves put pressure on the neuron. It causes an electromagnetic discharge from the piezoelectric properties of the microtubules in the water that's been shifted into a liquid crystal state. That causes the electrical signal to fire down the axon. Vibration or sound is converted to an electrical signal. The other one is the reverse effect of that. Applying a voltage produces a mechanical strain. So if I put an electrical signal into a piezoelectric property thing, it produces sound. Sound and vibration. Example of that is something called otoacoustic emissions. Now, otoacoustic is referring to the ear, and in particular, the cochlea of the inner ear, the spiral little guy that's based on, the sacred geometry patterns of the Fibonacci series and the golden section ratio spiral. So the electromagnetic properties that are going on inside the ear are causing this reverse effect of electromagnetic discharges in the inner ear are producing a sound. And the sound that's coming out of your ear is called an otoacoustic emission. And you can pick it up with a medical grade microphone that gets stuck in your ear, and you can hear this emission. Project number 3215 on our shelf is to explore that in great detail, and in particular to find out if the otoacoustic emission that is spontaneously coming out of your own ears, outwards instead of inwards, if the tone of that relates at all to the fundamental resonant frequency that we are finding in biotuning that causes homeostasis in the nervous system. Your primary fundamental frequency causes this to happen. Now, every octave of that and every harmonic of that will also make this balance happen in the autonomic, sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. The question is, how is this frequency that we find that causes balance in the core related to the otoacoustic emission already just coming out of your body in the first place? Logic would tell you that they have to be mathematically related. The question is, are they related as an octave direct or as a harmonic, which is not direct? And would it be possible, instead of hooking you up to the whole, HRV system and analyzing HRV signal to come up with a sympathetic, parasympathetic live on a computer screen, could we just put a microphone in your ear, record that sound, and do a spectral analysis of the sound and find out what frequency it is, and see if that frequency would cause balance in the autonomic nervous system? Quantum tunneling in water is confirmed. This is ordinary reality, folks. Welcome to it. breaking light speed. Here we go, down the rabbit hole. The quantum tunneling enigma. Quantum tunneling allows particles to bypass energy barriers. A new method has been proposed to measure the time it takes for particles to tunnel, which could challenge previous assertions of superluminal tunneling speeds. In other words, superlight, faster than the speed of light. This method involves using atoms as clocks to detect subtle time differences. We're talking about tunneling, quantum tunneling through time and space with the properties of water outside of time. Tunneling through time and tunneling through space. That water having the quantum properties of being able to go faster than the speed of light. What? Which brings us to previous conversations about what's called superluminal photons from holographic memory in the quantum computational ability of the quantum computer of your brain. The big mind, under the hood. Essentially, autonomic nervous system, default mode network. Default mode network, 95% of all brain function is under the hood in the default mode function of the brain. These four zones that give me my sense of self in time and space. So now it all hangs together. Superluminal photons would go faster than the speed of light, and quantum computation in the default mode network, 95% what's going on down there anyway, what's going on down there is the quantum computer reality generator that now we know can travel faster than the speed of light, that can calculate into the future and into the past in quantum ways that makes it that doesn't compute out here in the macro world. Its resonance in its finest possible example. Its entanglement, except not in space, but in time. Time and space, which may be exactly what's going on down there under the hood in the default mode network, where this is where I get my sense of self on the inside of my skin. Here's where I get my sense of self on the outside of my skin. Synchronize those two together and I get my normal sense of self in space. This is time. All past memories up to the present moment projected into the future, synchronize those together and I get my normal sense of now. But if I begin to hyper-synchronize all those up, where space and time is now a quantum effect in a quantum computer of entanglement of various regions of the cortex that don't need axon wiring between neurons for them to communicate. And deeper, we don't need any kind of physical communication between different parts of my quantum computer perceptions in time itself. Past and future are now entangled together. It's all information. It's math. The math involved in this information is, according to music theory, harmonics, overtones, mathematical relationships that fit nicely together in their standing wave. Standing waves stacked together according to music theory and harmonic overtone values form everything we see in the universe. I'm 99.99% space, and all the rest is standing waves stacked together in mathematical ratios where they fit perfectly together according to music theory. It's a huge chord. It's not a universe. It's a multi-lyric. And when all is said and done, it's you and me and all of us together in a grand matrix of the most amazing and fabulous and magical, mind-blowing, psychedelic dream that we're all having together. And we can manipulate this dream. We can make this dream anything we want. All we have to do is form a symbiotic bond with each other and share our dreams with each other and come up with a consensus of what the next moment is going to look like. That's why we're here today, about to put headphones on and link ourselves together and form a symbiotic whole that fleshes out that, to put pressure on the universe for an outcome. Here we go. Thank you all. I'll see you next Sunday. I'll leave the chat open for a little while, and then let's all move over to the Discord channel. Thank you. Thank you very much.